My name is Eleanor Hart, and I am 67 years old. For most of my life, I have been the quiet, steady figure in my family, the one who handled the paperwork, the savings, the real estate, and the long-term planning. Not because I was controlling, but because someone had to be the adult in a group of dreamers. My late husband, God rest him, always said I had the soul of an archivist and the memory of a lighthouse. I like to think he meant I helped keep people off the rocks. Life in my small coastal town had settled into a gentle rhythm after I retired from the library. I had my garden, my morning walks, my 2 duplex rentals I managed with care, and more peace than I had known in years. But peaceful lives are fragile things. They change the moment someone else decides to test your boundaries. In my case, that someone was my brother-in-law Martin. Martin had always been a thorn on the family tree, never outright malicious, but consistently irresponsible. The kind of man who blamed the government when he forgot to pay his taxes, or blamed the economy when he maxed out his credit cards on gadgets he didn't need. Still, I kept a cordial distance. He was family by marriage, and after my husband passed, I maintained the bridge out of respect for him. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every small gathering, I heard the same comments from Martin. "You're lucky, Ellie. You've got all those properties. Must be nice to sit on all that real estate. Some people collect stamps. Ellie collects buildings." He always said it with a chuckle, but you know the kind, the chuckle that isn't really a chuckle. The one that hides envy, resentment, and something even heavier underneath. I took it in stride. At 67, you learn when to react and when to let wind pass through empty branches. But then one quiet Tuesday morning, as I was tending to the rosemary bush near my front porch, my phone rang. It was my sister, Karen, and her voice trembled in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck lift. "Elle," she whispered, "we need to talk about Martin. He's in trouble. Serious trouble." In that split second, the peaceful life I had so carefully built, the one I thought was stable, began to shift. I hadn't yet realized it, but everything I owned, everything I had worked for, and everything Martin had mocked me for, was about to become the center of a storm he had created. And he was about to pull me straight into the middle of it. What Karen told me next changed the entire direction of my life. And it made me realize that some people call you greedy only because they want what you have. Karen tells me Martin needs something from me. Something enormous. Karen and I met that afternoon at the small cafe near the harbor, a place she and I had been frequenting since we were young mothers desperate for an hour away from diapers. She wrung her hands the whole time we waited for our tea, and by the time it arrived, I could feel the weight of her dread through the table. "Elle," she said quietly, "Martin isn't just in debt. He's in over his head." I remained calm, though I felt a tightening in my chest. "How over his head are we talking, Karen?" She swallowed. "He tried to start a business. A construction supply company. He borrowed money. A lot of it. He signed papers he didn't really read. And now, the bank wants collateral so he can restructure the loan." I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. "And what does that have to do with me?" Karen's eyes filled. "He wants you to use one of your properties as collateral, Ellie." The words settled between us like a stone dropped into deep water. I didn't speak for a moment. I just breathed. Slow, controlled, deliberate. When I finally asked the question, it was steady. "Why me? Doesn't he have assets of his own?" "He lost them," she whispered. "Everything he put up was repossessed. The house is still safe for now, but if he doesn't get this loan extended, they could come for it." I leaned back. "He wants my property so he can keep his house." Karen's silence was confirmation. I felt an old familiar ache in my chest, an echo of every time I had helped someone only to be left with the cleanup. "Karen," I said carefully, "why did he send you? Why not come himself?" She wiped her eyes. "Because he knows you won't yell at me." That stung, not because it was true, but because it revealed something else. Martin saw me as a resource. Not a person. Not family. A vault. He said, Karen hesitated, looking down at her hands. He said it wouldn't be a big deal. That you don't even need all that property. That well, he said you're just sitting on it like some kind of landholder. It took me a moment to breathe through the heat rising in my chest. He called me greedy, I said softly. Karen's face crumpled. I'm sorry. He didn't mean it, he's just scared. He meant it, I said. He's meant it every time he's said it. But that wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal came 10 minutes later, when Karen revealed the truth. She whispered. He already listed your duplex address on the preliminary application. Without asking you. Without telling you. They think you already agreed. The room tilted slightly. He forged my consent. No signature yet, she said quickly. But he told them you were on board. They're expecting your paperwork tomorrow. My heart pounded. Not from fear. Not from shock. From something colder. Something sharper. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. I stood, placed a 20 on the table for the tea we barely touched, and said quietly, I want every document. Every email. Every phone number. Right now. Karen looked up, startled. What are you going to do? I took my coat, slid it over my shoulders, and answered with the calm certainty of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for storms just like this one. I'm going to find out exactly how deep your husband has dug this hole. I paused at the door. And then I'll decide whether he deserves a rope or a spotlight. I discover something in the documents that makes the situation far worse than Karen admitted. Karen came to my house that evening with a stack of paperwork so thick it looked like a dissertation. It wasn't organized. Of course it wasn't. Martin never organized anything. Receipts mixed with bank statements, half-completed forms, letters marked final notice, and sticky notes that meant nothing without context. As I sifted through the chaos, I felt myself slipping into a familiar version of my old self. The librarian, the archivist, the quiet solver of problems people didn't even realize existed until too late. But this time was different. This time, the problem wasn't a misplaced file or a lost receipt. This problem was a man who had weaponized his incompetence. While I sorted the papers, Karen sat on the couch, crying softly. I didn't comfort her immediately. I knew her tears weren't just for the situation. They were for the years she'd spent living with a man who never learned, never listened, never stopped making promises no one could keep. Once the papers were in neat piles, I took a deep breath. Karen, I said gently, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No softening. No protecting him. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I'll tell you everything. And she did. She told me about the business idea that Martin had gotten from a man he met at a golf course. A man who had guaranteed easy profits. She told me about the loan he took out even though she begged him not to. She told me about the finances, how Martin had hidden notices until they piled up so high he couldn't pretend they were junk mail anymore. And she told me something else. She said, her voice brittle. He's jealous of you. I looked up at her. Jealous. He's always said it's not fair you got to build wealth, while he kept getting knocked down. He said you don't understand struggle. That you act above people. That you think you're better. I let out a slow breath through my nose. I was raised in a 2-bedroom house with 4 siblings. I worked 3 jobs through college. I bought my first duplex with a loan I paid back penny by penny. I planned. I saved. I worked quietly for 40 years. Karen nodded. I know. But Martin doesn't see that. He only sees that you ended up with something he wants. There it was. The motive. Martin didn't resent that I had property. He resented that I had discipline. And he was trying to use my discipline to save him from his lack of it. As I continued to read through the documents, I noticed something troubling. A signature line already filled out with sloppy penmanship. Karen, I said, my voice flat. Who signed my name? She jolted upright. What? Let me see. I handed the page to her, and her face turned white. This wasn't here earlier. I swear to you. I don't know how. It doesn't matter how, I said. But inside, something cold settled into my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't fear. This wasn't desperation. Martin had already crossed a line. He wasn't asking for my help. He was taking it. Whether I agreed or not. Karen whispered. What are you going to do? What I wanted to say was, I'm going to teach your husband a lesson he should have learned 40 years ago. But what I actually said was, I'm going to start digging. And when I'm done, we'll know exactly which of us is greedy. I find evidence that Martin may have falsified more than just a signature. Something that could legally implicate me if I don't act fast. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Instead, I brewed a pot of coffee, set up my old scanner, and began digitizing every document Karen had brought me. I labeled each file, noted each date, and highlighted every inconsistency. By 2 a.m, I had identified multiple red flags, but one in particular made my stomach drop. A form claiming I had verbally agreed to serve as guarantor. A form filed electronically, with my name typed neatly. I stared at it, cold anger settling behind my ribs. Typed names prove nothing, I whispered to myself. But the timestamp did. The date matched a day I had been in the hospital recovering from a gallbladder procedure. Someone had entered my name during the exact window I was under anesthesia. Martin hadn't just been presumptuous. He had been calculated. At 8 the next morning, I began making calls. First the bank. Then the loan officer. Then the business registration office. I requested information, asked procedural questions, checked for inconsistencies. I framed each inquiry as if I was simply trying to better understand the situation. People talk when they think you're harmless. And I've spent years perfecting the art of sounding harmless. By noon, I had collected enough information to confirm my worst suspicion. The bank believed I had verbally confirmed my willingness to act as collateral holder in a recorded phone call. A phone call I never made. But someone had used my name. Ma'am, the loan officer told me. The caller identified herself as Eleanor Hart and referenced personal information that matched your file. It was enough to proceed with the preliminary approval. Personal information. The phrase echoed like a warning bell. Someone had access to data they shouldn't have had. Birth date. Former address. The account number from my old credit union card. Martin. It had to be. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I asked, could I receive a copy of that recording? The officer hesitated. I'm not sure we can release it. You can, I said evenly. And you will. Because I never made that call. And I'm legally entitled to any document or recording that includes my personal information. Silence. Then, I'll send it to you by end of day. I felt an electric cocktail of dread and purpose. While I waited for the file, I drove to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a kind woman named Marjorie who had known me since my library days, pulled my property files with a sympathetic smile. She said, I was wondering when you'd come. That sentence stopped me cold. Why's that? Because your brother-in-law was here last week asking how to transfer a property title to a temporary lien structure. Whatever that means. I told him only the legal owner could start that process. He seemed irritated. My jaw tightened. He wasn't just asking for help. He was planning for ownership. After I left the clerk's office, I sat in my car and let the reality settle over me like a heavy blanket. Martin had tried to initiate steps to use my property, even though he had no legal right. He had impersonated me on the phone. He had possibly signed my name. He had accessed personal information he should not have had. This wasn't about saving his business anymore. This was about transferring his consequences onto me. My phone buzzed then, and I saw the loan officer's email. The recording was attached. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. What I heard made my blood run cold. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't even a good imitation. But the caller used my full legal name, my old address, my husband's name, and ended the call by saying, "We're family. Of course I'll put up the property." I sat in my car for a long time, listening to those words again and again. And then I whispered, "Martin, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." I realized that the impersonation on the call required information only someone inside my family could have provided, meaning it may not have been Martin acting alone. It had gnawed at me all night. The voice on that recording wasn't Martin's. He had a gravelly baritone. The voice I heard was lighter, nervous, rushed. The kind of voice belonging to someone who'd never lied on record before. So who else knew my personal information? The truth hit me with a slow, crushing inevitability. Karen. Not out of malice. Not out of scheming. But out of desperation. And desperation is a dangerous tool in the hands of someone easily influenced. I visited her the next morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, eyes hollow. Her coffee cup shook in her hands. "Karen," I said softly, "I need you to tell me the truth." She didn't answer. I placed a printed transcript of the recorded phone call on the table. Her breath caught. I didn't. "Look at me," I said gently. She lifted her eyes, and in them, I saw guilt, deep, agonizing guilt. "Karen," I said, "was it you?" She broke. She sobbed so hard I had to steady her shoulders. She cried. "He told me it was the only way. He told me you'd understand. He told me you wouldn't let him sink." I just repeated what he told me to say. I didn't sign anything. I swear, I just made the call. I closed my eyes, letting the truth settle. My sister. My only living sibling. The one person in the world I had always tried to protect. She had betrayed me to protect him. When her sobs quieted, I sat opposite her and folded my hands. "Karen," I said calmly, "listen to me very carefully. I am not going to let this destroy you. But you need to understand something. You two didn't just overstep. You impersonated me during a financial negotiation. That is fraud." She winced like I'd struck her. I didn't mean." "I know you didn't," I said. "But intent does not erase impact." She buried her face in her hands. "What do I do?" "You do exactly as I say," I said. "And not one step more or less." She nodded, eyes red. I continued. "Martin didn't just panic. He manipulated you into committing a crime on his behalf. That's not desperation. That's exploitation." A quiet, horrible realization crossed her face, as if she had always known but never let herself admit it. She whispered. "He said if I didn't help him, we'd lose everything. He said you have more than enough. He said you wouldn't miss one property." There it was again. Greedy. Selfish. Obstacle. Every word Martin used to justify violating boundaries he never respected. I placed a hand on Karen's. "This ends today." Her eyes widened. "Are you going to the police?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm going to the bank." She swallowed. "To do what?" "To expose the truth," I said, "on my terms." I gathered the documents, the transcript, the recorded call, and everything else I'd collected. And before I left, I said quietly, "Karen, you're my sister. I love you. But love does not mean enabling. And enabling is what kept Martin from learning consequences." She nodded, tears still streaming. What will happen to him?" I picked up my coat and turned toward the door. "That depends," I said, "on whether he tells the truth, or continues hiding behind lies." I arrive at the bank only to discover Martin has already tried to finalize the collateral transfer, without me. When I stepped into the bank, the loan officer, Mr. Jensen, looked startled to see me. Mrs. Hart, he said, standing quickly. We weren't expecting you. I smiled politely. On the contrary, you should have been. Before he could respond, a familiar voice echoed from the corner conference room. Ellie, what are you doing here? Martin emerged, dressed in a wrinkled suit, irritation flashing across his face before he forced it into a smile. This was the moment. The one I had been preparing for. The one where lies would collide with truth. I looked him squarely in the eyes. I'm here, I said calmly, because you're trying to use a property I own. And you're doing it without my permission. He opened his mouth, but I continued, slow, measured, unwavering. I know about the call made in my name. I know about the forms with my typed consent. I know you sent my sister to plead on your behalf after you'd already told the bank I agreed. His face reddened. Ellie, I was going to talk to you. No, I said. You were going to wait until the documents were processed so it would be too late for me to undo it. Mr. Jensen cleared his throat, glancing nervously between us. Perhaps we should discuss this privately? We will, I said. In the conference room. With the recording. The color drained from Martin's face. 10 minutes later, the recording played on the speaker. Karen's shaky voice filled the small room. Martin couldn't even look at me. When it ended, I folded my hands. Martin, I said quietly, do you deny instructing my sister to impersonate me? He swallowed. I asked her to help. That's all. I thought. You thought I wouldn't notice, I finished. He stiffened. Ellie, it's one property. You don't even use it. You're sitting on assets you'll never need. I'm trying to keep my family afloat. Is that such a crime? I leaned forward, voice low and razor sharp. No, Martin. The crime was believing you were entitled to the fruits of my lifetime of labor. The crime was coercing my sister into fraud. The crime was impersonating me in a financial transaction. And the crime was assuming your irresponsibility was my obligation. He blustered. But you have so much. And you have so little, I said, because you squandered every opportunity you ever had. Silence. For the first time, Martin's bravado cracked. Ellie, he whispered, I'm going to lose everything. And for a moment, I almost felt pity. But pity without accountability is how he got here. I exhaled slowly. Mr. Jensen, I said, turning to the officer, I am formally withdrawing any implied or assumed consent regarding this loan. I request a fraud investigation into the unauthorized communication made in my name. I also request that no lien or collateral process using my assets proceed without notarized, in-person documentation. Mr. Jensen nodded quickly. Of course. Immediately. Martin stared at me, stunned. Elle, please. Don't do this. Don't ruin me. I stood, gathering my documents. I'm not ruining you, I said softly. You did that yourself. I'm simply refusing to let you take me down with you. I walked out, leaving him pale and speechless. That night, Martin shows up at my door, angry, panicked, and threatening to fix everything himself. It was nearly midnight when I heard the front gate slam. I stepped to the window and saw Martin pacing in my driveway, red-faced and frantic. I opened the door but kept the storm latch between us. Martin, I said calmly, you need to leave. He stepped closer. Ellie, listen. I can fix this, but you need to reverse what you told the bank. They think I'm a criminal now. You committed a crime, I said. They're simply noticing. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't think it would go this far. That, I said, is exactly your problem. He grabbed the latch, not violently, but with enough desperation to make my heart thud. Please, he begged. Karen is terrified. The bank is threatening legal action. We could lose the house. You should have thought of that, I said, before you dragged Karen into a scheme she didn't understand. He winced. I continued, voice steady. I met with a fraud investigator this afternoon. The bank is launching a formal review. The call recording implicates someone. If Karen is honest about what happened, she will likely receive a warning and mandatory financial counseling. His eyes widened. And me. Forgery and impersonation are taken far more seriously. He sagged against the railing. Ellie, I'm begging you. Don't let them charge me. I studied him carefully. You want to avoid charges? I asked. He nodded rapidly. Yes, please. I'll do anything. Then you will sign a written admission, I said, stating that Karen acted under your instruction, that you attempted to use my properties without permission, and that you impersonated me in a financial call. He froze. I can't sign that. If you don't, I said, the bank will pursue criminal charges. And I will cooperate fully. He stared at me for a long time. Then his shoulders slumped. What happens if I sign? You undergo mandatory financial rehabilitation. The bank will restructure your loan under supervision. And you will be barred from applying for credit without a cosigner for 5 years. He swallowed. No jail. No jail, I said. Not if you take responsibility. At that moment, something changed in his face. Not remorse, exactly, but resignation. The acceptance of a man who finally met a wall he couldn't break through with excuses. I'll sign, he whispered. Good, I said. Come back tomorrow morning. And leave before I call the police for trespassing. He nodded and retreated into the night, shoulders hunched. The next morning, he returned with eyes red from crying, or from a sleepless night. He signed the statement. I submitted it to the bank. Consequences began immediately. His business was placed under financial guardianship. He lost control of all major decisions. His personal spending was monitored. Karen entered counseling. Their house was safe, but nothing else was. And as for me, I was safe. My assets were safe. My boundaries were safe. But something else happened too. Something I didn't expect. Karen came to me 2 weeks later and said, Elle, your refusal to save him might have saved him anyway. I reflect on the aftermath, on whether justice was enough, and what came next for our family. It has now been 6 months since that long, crushing week when everything unraveled. Karen and I meet every Sunday afternoon for tea. Our relationship is healing. Slowly, painfully, honestly. She tells me that stepping out from under Martin's influence is like learning to breathe again after years of shallow inhales. As for Martin, he is different now. Not kind. Not wise. But quieter. The financial counselor assigned to him said something I will never forget. Some people do not change until consequences force them to. Martin now pays every bill on time. He no longer asks for handouts. He no longer comments on my properties. He no longer calls me greedy. When I see him at family gatherings, he is polite, reserved, almost humbled. And though I don't forgive easily, I don't hold rage either. Anger is heavy, but clarity is light. One afternoon, as I was leaving a small family barbecue, Martin approached me awkwardly. Ellie, he said, staring at the ground. I just wanted to say, thank you. You could have let them charge me. You could have destroyed me. But you didn't. I nodded. I don't destroy people, Martin. I reveal them. What they do after that is their choice. He swallowed. I won't forget it. Whether he meant it, I'll never know. But it was enough. I drove home thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the fear, the confrontation. And I realized something important. People often call you greedy when they want what you earned. People call you selfish when your boundaries inconvenience them. People call you cold when their manipulation no longer works on you. But the truth is simple. Holding others accountable is not cruelty. Protecting what you built is not greed. And refusing to sacrifice yourself for someone else's irresponsibility is not selfishness. It is maturity. It is self-respect. It is survival. As I sit here now, writing this at my kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood, I feel something I didn't feel before. Peace. Not the peace that comes from avoiding conflict. The peace that comes after facing it head-on, calmly, intelligently, and with unshakable dignity. If you're listening to my story, I'll leave you with this. When someone tries to guilt you for having boundaries, remember that guilt is the weapon of the entitled. Stand firm. Stand clear. Stand tall. And ask yourself, who is truly being greedy here, the one who earned, or the one who demands? Thank you for hearing my story. I'd love to know, what would you have done if you were in my place?